Andy, I did it last night. I
Uh-oh.
I watched Dial of Destiny, Indiana Jones Dial of Destiny. I was very apprehensive
Yeah.
because I wasn't sure if it was going to be something like Crystal Skull, which was a colossal
Yeah.
atrocity, and or if it was going to be harken back to the thing. And I heard all the stories. I heard about the de-aging process and all this other stuff. I enjoyed it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was I think it was about 30 minutes too long, but they added one location they probably didn't need to go to. But it was it was good Indiana Jones, and I was happy.
I mean, great character, right? I mean, and there have been some really good movies. Even the ones that weren't great were still entertaining. I don't think I saw The Crystal Skull, but I,
It
I was thinking, I was thinking about watching this myself. I saw it and I was like, I might have to check this out just because I really enjoy Harrison Ford, and Indy is just such a classic, character, and he's probably going to make like seven more of these anyway, just because it never seemed to end. But I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm glad you took it in. Happy Monday, start of the week to you and Indiana Jones, Dave.
Yeah, it's been great. We've had our whole entire family here. Everyone is sick. We've got two dogs running around, two cats. It's utter madness and mayhem. But that's what the holidays are about. And then
It
you get
is.
to watch these movies with everybody and have fun. So, okay, Andy, let's get into our normal Monday routine.
Right.
Let's talk sports. Let's open up on sports. Last week you were down and I was up.
Yep.
This week, much different. How are you feeling about your Detroit Lions after that whooping on Saturday night?
Dave, that was the Lions' probably best, most complete game of the season. Great to do that in front of a national audience of like the 10 people that watched on NFL Plus, NFL Network, but still, after the Thanksgiving debacle, a much needed game against a team that's been playing really well. Lions did exactly what they needed to do. They are one game away, in theory. If they beat Minnesota here on Saturday night on Christmas Eve, the Lions secure the division and probably can't really change positions too much. They're currently in third in the NFC. That probably really won't change. So my hope as a Lions fan is that the Lions do what they need to do, win on the road in Minnesota, secure the division for the first time in many, many years, and then can rest players in Dallas and that second Minnesota game. Because to be honest, one, you don't want to get smashed in Dallas, which is a possibility. So might as well do it with your backup so you don't take any guilt with it. And then, two, get ready for the playoffs, your players, key players coming back this week for the Lions who's been out basically the whole season. One of our great cornerbacks we picked up from Philly. And the rest of the team, the O line was healed up for the first time in a while this week. And that's why the Lions did what they were able to do in the game. So it was a great game for Lions fans. It was an important game. And Dave, your Dallas Cowboys looked pretty god awful on the road in Buffalo. Debacle.
It was a like this is classic Cowboys setup.
Yeah.
You get everybody excited about it, and like from the start they were just dominating, thoroughly dominated, and they couldn't stop the run. Same thing happened against San Francisco back probably like 2 months ago. They couldn't stop the run, and they just got obliterated. They were never in that game, and Dak looked like the Dak that causes so many Cowboys fans frustration.
Yeah.
And I think that when the game needs to be in his hands, it was just hard. Like it's hard. Now, it kind of made me realize a couple different things. One, are the Eagles bad because like the Cowboys thoroughly dominated them and could have won in Philadelphia weeks before that? I just like I'm just like in a perpetual state of who's actually like really good other than San Francisco. Like it's San
Yeah.
Francisco and everybody else behind it. And I'm just not really sure who's there. I will say this though, Andy, that matchup that we were both looking for, Dallas and Detroit, in not this week, but the week after,
Yeah.
that has the potential to be like an all-time dud because you could be resting players like you said. The Cowboys have no incentive to win the rest. I mean, they're pretty much locked into the fifth seed
Yeah.
because they're not going to win the division and they're not going to be like the sixth and seventh seed are both at what 7-7 or something. So it's not like the Cowboys are going to lose the fifth seed. So they could be resting players. The Lions could be resting players, and we could both be like, okay, whoever doesn't want to win this game the most, kind of thing. So
Yeah, and I think that's a likely scenario. And if you look at the playoff picture today, Dallas and Philly are in, along with San Francisco. And if Philly wins tonight on the road against Seattle, the Lions are in. And like I said, while that 6 and 7 spot can change, amongst a handful of not terrible but mediocre teams, all of which can beat the Lions and the Cowboys on a good day, to be honest with you, as we've seen. Um, Most likely the playoff you're starting to cement. And you're right, the incentive could go away there, but it sets up some really interesting matchups because it sets up a strong likelihood that Dallas would play on the road in San Francisco in the second round and take their annual shellacking against the Niners in the playoffs, which would be entertaining. And it would set up the Lions and Eagles in the playoffs, which, one would be a really interesting game. Eagles have beat the Lions the last couple times they've played. And on a personal level, my youngest son is an Eagles fan. I'm a Lions fan, and so we'd love to see that happen. But it was a wild weekend of football. And Dave, this is what the NFL wants, right? Parity,
Yeah,
everybody's the
yeah.
same, right? You're going to have really good teams miss the playoffs, right? The Buffalo Bills, who have beat the Chiefs and the Cowboys now in back-to-back weeks, could still miss the playoffs and might be the best team in the AFC possibly, but they lost some key games. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. It was a fun weekend of NFL football, and while the Niners are cream of the NFC, I still think the Ravens are right there with them, and I think they played a really good game against the Jaguars last night. The Jaguars are a good football team, so I think we'll see. I think it's gonna be a fun playoff season for sure.
Are the Jaguars good though? That's the thing. Like like the end of the half there, they fucking they blew that one, not even getting a field goal out of it. And so I'm not really sure. I do think the Ravens are good because like they didn't deserve to win, and yet they're like, fine, if you guys are not going to try to win this game,
Yeah.
we will, and so that's the mark of a good team too. So I guess Andy, the question mark here is this: is then who are your top five? We did this last week. Who like if how would you rank these? This is a challenge.
It is, and and I'm tempted to put some people in top five that I'm going to hold back on, right? I mean, the way the Lions played Saturday night, if they can play like that, they're a top five team,
Yeah.
but they can also play the game of football they've been playing the month before, which is awful. And so I can't put them in the top five, honestly, at this point. I also think the Cleveland Browns, despite a not great showing this last weekend, they are a dangerous team. That defense is ferocious. And if Joe Flacco is playing well for them, they could be a threat. So I think the Browns are right there on the cusp of
Did you,
being,
did you see the end of that game? The Hail Mary?
yeah, I
That's
mean,
crazy.
which is appropriate for that game. Appropriate
Right,
for that
right.
game. So it was a good finish. So I think they're a threat as well. So, but I'm
Yeah.
gonna leave them out. I'm gonna keep my top five the same teams as last week. I don't think that's changed yet, although it's possible. But I did change the order a little bit. So I kept Miami at five. I think that's still fair. I did drop your Cowboys to fourth, even though they've beat the Eagles once and almost beaten the second time. Their inconsistency is a concern, I think. So I moved them to fourth, put Philly right above them because even though Philly has had some not great games, they find a way to win, as they did against Dallas in their first matchup. And so I've got Philly at three, and I'm keeping San Fran at two and Baltimore one. I just think something about Baltimore is consistently good. Whereas San Fran is still a question mark to me in the sense. I mean, they're a great team. I still don't understand the 3 game slide, and I still don't believe in Brock Purdy. And I still think Baltimore's defense will be so disruptive to the Niners that they'll get it done if they play each other. Now, the storyline I want, to be honest, if the Lions don't go to Super Bowl, which I don't expect them to do, my favorite storyline, I think, is still the Cleveland Browns beating Baltimore, Joe Flacco beating the Ravens, and then the Cleveland Browns with Joe Flacco beating the Niners. It would be a pretty funny storyline, I think, for me. But I think it's still Baltimore, San Francisco, the top of the NFL right now. Dave, what about you?
Yeah, this is a tough one because I agree. I like your storylines. I think Joe Flacco reemerging and the Cleveland Browns, I mean, their defense is legit. I mean, I think that's the big thing. I think the when you go to look at the Ravens versus Niners matchup, if any team can take the run away from the Niners,
Yeah,
I think they're entirely beatable. But that means containing Debo Samuel and Christian McCaffrey, and that's a tough, tall order. So I'm reluctantly going to keep my top five, but I'm like you. I'm going to move things around a little bit. I think the Cowboys are borderline five because again, this exposes one of their biggest areas. Is if they can't stop the run, and they clearly cannot stop the run,
yeah,
then they won't be able to win in the playoffs. So I'll have them at 5. Number 4, I'm going to go with the Dolphins. Because this will be an interesting. The Cowboys play the Dolphins this week. The Dolphins can run the ball, so let's see if the Cowboys can make adjustments there. I'm going to move the Eagles up, even though I don't think that they are very good. And then I'm going to keep the Ravens at 2, move them up from 3 to 2, and then keep the nine. I just think the Niners are 10 point, 10 points favorites on any team in the NFL at this point. So they won't be the odds makers, won't make them 10 points over the
Yeah,
Ravens or anything.
yeah.
But when the game plays out, they'll win by more than 10. So that if everything is going, that's where I see things. So
All right.
um
Some
yeah.
consistency there, Dave. But we're keeping same teams, right? 2 weeks in a
Yeah.
row, same teams. So let's shuffling in the order a little bit. We'll see. We'll see if the NFL agrees with us when their power rankings drop. Now we're doing this before the Monday night game again, so if Philly throws a stinker in Seattle, that could change the opinions here a little bit. But we'll see. We'll see. And I'll just add, one. I like your top five. I think it's fair. I think that those teams could shuffle a couple ways. But I just before we leave the NFL, I'll just say, if not the Lions get a Super Bowl, I say the city of Cleveland would be a great team to win the Super Bowl, right? Never been like the Lions, haven't been good since the 50s, really, like the Lions. And I got to see a game there 2 years ago. Awesome crowd. I mean,
Yeah.
really, they're a fun crowd, not a mean crowd. We were there cheering up the Lions in the rain. And they were welcoming fans, just having fun, barking like the dog pound barks and just being goofy in their miserable brown and orange uniforms that are the garbage of the NFL with their stupid elf mascot that makes no sense. I mean, nothing about that team makes sense, but they're old and always bad. And it would be great to see them win. It would be great to see them win without Watson, who I don't want to see the Super
Yeah.
Bowl. But anyway, David, that's a good weekend of football, I think. Anything else in the NFL you're thinking here?
Andy, if we ranked our top 5, who would your worst team be? Just your worst. Who would that
Worse in
be?
the NFL?
Yeah, worse in the NFL.
It's still the Panthers. They got to win, and you could argue. I mean, the Patriots stink. The Commanders stink. I mean, the Commanders are just throwing, I think, really. But
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
but the Panthers, that is a team in disarray. Oof, and I don't know who wants to coach that team. I've heard rumors about Belichick going to the Panthers. That
Yeah.
would be the end of that guy because that team. They're gonna take a while to rebound. They don't even have a first round draft pick because they're awful
I,
decision making. They're the worst. Well, I don't know. What do you think, Dave?
yeah, that is. I mean, if you look, I'm happy for the Panthers because they definitely could have used the win yesterday. I like Bryce Young as a person. I hope he's successful. I never want to see a quarterback who's like very modest and stuff who like gets shit on all the time. And so I hope he does well. Um, I will say the Chargers are pretty bad. And look, we talked about this on Friday.
Yeah.
Brandon Staley, I don't think he made it on the plane, even though they reported it on
Yeah.
Friday. I think he was fired. He had to have been fired right after that game.
Yeah.
So, but all fun stuff. So, Andy, we talked a lot about football. I think that's a good sports check-in for the week. We got exciting games coming up, and of course, as you go into Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, be a fun weekend of sports. All right, Andy, let's move on to other topics. You've got a topic to bring to the table. Big news last week. Rudy Giuliani was held liable for some of his post-election antics,
Yeah.
and there's been some reporting out on this. So, Andy, where do you want to start on that part?
I want to start with the proper transition, Dave. Des- despite you trying to rush the transition, but
I know. I'm sorry.
so look, Giuliani. Like, I don't spend a lot of time on this. I just want to kind of. It's important to recap this, right? I know that the faithful, the believers. You're not going to change anybody's opinion there, and I get that. But I just think it's worth pausing and putting things in perspective. And somebody who does that really well. I think I mentioned him before on our podcast. Is David French. He's an opinion writer at the New York Times. David's I'd say, libertarian leaning, classical liberal leaning individual, an evangelical Christian, worth noting. He and his wife, but both people of faith. Interesting story on both of them. So not hostile to faith, not hostile to conservative-ish politics, but vehemently hostile to the MAGA movement. And over the weekend, Sunday, David dropped an opinion piece called "Behold MAGA Man," where he really digs into Giuliani, and he points out a couple of things I think are worth noting in general, and I shared this over the weekend on Threads and shared a couple things. It's basically what he's saying in short is that MAGA and Trump is like a zombie bite, right? I mean, you get bitten, and the person that was there is no longer there, and they're consumed, like a zombie by MAGA. And then he kind of talks about what that is a little bit. And important to remember with Giuliani, right, is that he's already pled guilty, right? He's already said, I did
Yep.
these things, right? So it's not like this is a verdict, against him. He said, yeah, I was full of garbage, and that's why he's being told to pay $148 million. And then he had the remarkable audacity to make I think he was on a show of some kind, and he made this plea of helping him out, right? And it's not about the money, and he talked about his faith and how he prayed to Christ, numerous times, and it was really tough to watch. But then, as the friends talks about Giuliani, he sort of describes MAGA on trial, right? As he talks about the verdict, and he describes its methods, morality, and the means it uses to escape, quoting here, the consequences of its dreadful facts. And he talked about the fact that, hey, this really wasn't Giuliani; it was MAGA on trial. And he equates them not to a zombie, but kind of to Sigourney Weaver's famous character in Ghostbusters, where she says, there is no Dana, only Zool. And he equates that to in Giuliani's case, that there is no more Rudy Giuliani, only Donald Trump, right? And he lists a number of characters that are in a similar boat that had lives prior to being fully, bought into and consumed by MAGA. And some of the things he points out there are that, truthfulness is incompatible with Trumpism, that, once you're fully into the MAGA man character, you often supplement your lies with rage, which I think we've seen played out a number of times. And then also the finding of religion, but not in the sense of remorse, coming to regret your actions, but rather this incredible victimization that is just abounding in the MAGA movement, right? That they are persecuted people, and the world is against them, and it's an identity that they take on. And yeah, the church was persecuted, but not the same thing, right? And sort of these things mixed together to inform the MAGA man that Giuliani has become. I think it's a really interesting take. I think it's right. I agree with it. But to see someone like Giuliani, who is just so incredibly popular at the height of his leadership in New York City, both for the things he did as governor and for his response to 9/11, and just where he is today, it's sad to see. And really the person he's become as part of the Trump entourage is just it's embarrassing. It's really it's going to leave a sad mark on who he is, his legacy, and it really captures well sort of what the whole MAGA movement sort of looks like to those that aren't part of the movement, that aren't bought in, that aren't the faithful. It's how it looks to everybody else. I think Dave does a great job capturing that. Dave, any thoughts on that, on sort of this whole zombie bite and becoming MAGA man?
Yeah, well, I think it's a great great analogy for one thing. I mean, I have so many different ways to take this. One, Giuliani, for all he did, as you noted, as mayor and governor, like to be this, like
Yeah,
this is where you're at. I mean, it really puts a stain on 9/11 in some respects, and saying, hey, this is a guy who showed incredible leadership, who took that responsibility and did an amazing job, and now he's this. And
yeah,
and how do you get to that point? And yeah, maybe a zombie bite's the proper way to say it, because the one thing that always strikes me about the MAGA movement and all that other stuff is it's a surface level argument. Like there's no depth to it. There's no truth behind all of the assertions and the beliefs and the policy statements or whatever. If you talk to any of the group, it's, well, we need to build a wall, but why? Why do you need to build a wall? There's no depth behind it. There's no understanding of the immigration problem. There's no understanding of the challenges that is faced with building a wall or things like that. And that's exactly the argument. You don't want to give to Ukraine, but why? Why don't you want to give to Ukraine? Oh, we need to make America great, but why can't we do both?
yeah,
This is the stuff that again, these surface level sound bites that people just fixate on. And if you go back to it, if you really look at the Trump presidency, all the things that he said he was going to do never happened. None of that occurred. And you can say, hey, we went 4 years without war during Donald Trump, but hey, if you're placating dictators and if you're turning the other way, is that really America leadership on the global stage? And the answer is no. And frankly, that's what I want, and that's why I just will never align with those values. So there's just so much behind it that it is MAGA on trial, and I do hope. Yeah, it's kind of funny because when you were talking through the recap of the piece there, all I could continue to think about are in the 80s, you had those televangelists,
Yeah.
Jim Baker, Billy Swagger, all these guys who would get out there and say, hey, live this life for Christ and live this life for according to the Bible. Don't mind me. I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to
Yeah.
take the money and I'm going to do the things that I want with it. Um, and I feel the same way with Trump. Hey, this is live your life for MAGA, make America great, and all this other stuff. Don't mind me. I'm going to go and do whatever I want to do. I'm going to steal classified information. I'm going to take classified information. Please don't get in the argument with me. But it's those type of things. I'm going to take these lavish vacations. I'm going to do this. Meanwhile, I don't really care about the rest of you. And so I think that's just where the fallacy of that movement is. And it is it's a I wouldn't go as far as to say full cult, but it is kind of a borderline movement where you just there's just no depth to it. And that's
Yeah.
just what I really get frustrated with. And that's why I've left the Republican Party for all intents and purposes, because there is no policy position. There is no standing. There is no, I'm going to stand on these grounds. It just is broken. And so that's just kind of where I feel, Andy.
Yeah, and I think some really good points around the depth. I mean, there are arguments to be made on any position somebody wants to take, right? On immigration policy, on border security, on funding Ukraine or Israel or whatever it is. Lots of options, but the MAGA movement doesn't really have a lot of substantive depth there, and I think that is worth noting. So, Dave, I think these were fair takes. So, hey, we could probably go on a lot longer. You touched on some of the unprincipled faith leaders we grew up with, and I've got opinions there as well on the MAGA movement, and even some of the things I hold Mike Pence and others responsible for, and that's something we can come back to another time. But I think there was one more topic you want to touch on quickly, perhaps before we wrapped up.
Yeah, I think we may let's dig into it just a little bit, and there's a transition. I'll do better, Andy. So again, my son, I have both my boys came back in town, one from college and one from being stationed out in the army. And the oldest one is engaged. I think we've mentioned that before. And so they're doing the wedding planning. We were talking about, bachelor parties and all this other stuff. And um I'm amazed at the state of bachelor parties these days. It's their destination, and it's bachelorette parties too. These are destination events now, where you go somewhere and you have these all-inclusive events and whatnot. And and then there's like bachelor party gifts, for bridesmaids and groomsmen, and you have to do this presentation on Instagram, and you have to do some sort of like big reveal on Instagram. I'm like, hey, where are we? Where the fuck are we at this point? It is like, look, like I think you and I had both different experiences. Like I've been to a bachelor party, a couple bachelor parties, and I had one where I flew into town for my wedding. I was out in Colorado, and I flew back for a wedding in Virginia. So I didn't have the true sense of bachelor party, but we did go out, have some drinks. I got drunk the night before my my bachelor party, passed out. My wife loved that one. My future wife at the time loved that, especially since I had the keys to some of the things that were important for the next day. But like, what happened to strippers and getting drunk? Like, where are we on that? Like, I'm thoroughly confused. I mean, I can imagine getting your groomsmen a small little gift, but like, like these. elaborate routines, and this is the Instagram age, and it fucking pisses me off. And I'm sitting there like, why are we spending money on all this shit when it's just a, and I'm sorry, I'm ranting, I'm dropping F-bombs and all this other stuff, but this is just, to me it's preposterous. Where are we here, Andy?
Well, you know, I love your full-on embrace of strip clubs and alcohol, right?
I mean,
But yeah, I think it's a big difference in generations. I think you know, one, I think millennials, younger millennials, and Gen Z, I think it's an experience-based life that they live, right? Everything's about the experience, capturing it, reliving it, telling it. And so I think we see a lot more of this, like you've got to build the hype, you've got to get the picture, you've got to have been there and done something different and new. And that's very different than what we grew up with, right? Because, you know, if anything, you know, you had a disposable camera or something like that to
yeah.
capture some of it, and you probably didn't want most of it documented. So I think it's just a very different approach. And, you know, it's easy to sort of make fun of, and it does get costly, and it is kind of crazy at times. But at the same time, you know, I think there's a lot less emphasis in this generation of some of the, you know, to be honest, excessive drinking and partying that I think was more common with sort of Gen X, right? I think you know they're drinking less, they're having less sex, they're sort of a calmer generation. Instead, they are sort of you know living in the social media environment, you know, doing these extravagant right from baby gender reveals to fantastic engagements to the bachelor parties. It really is different. I don't know that it's any worse. It can seem like lunacy at times. You know, and this is coming from a guy that you know, you might recall, Dave, the Army moved up my report date after college, so I had to move up my wedding. My wedding was a very fast event, no bachelor party, and then being in the Army the next 10 years and overseas and whatnot. I didn't attend any of yours or any of the friends' bachelor parties during that time when sort of everybody gets married. It was different for me for sure, but I think you know, like is one better than the other? From a father's standpoint, I could see your frustration with things, but from a
Crazy.
reality, you know, it's maybe it's not the worst thing if kids aren't getting completely
Yeah.
blacked out, you know, and at the strip club doing God knows what. You know, so I could see the argument for both. You know, I don't envy you. I'm a few years behind you, I think there, so my story might change here come you know 2028. But you know, I appreciate your father's frustration, Dave. Yeah, I like the old man on the lawn moment you're having.
Yeah, I think that's our Gen X little old man on the yard type of thing. So we have fair points, Andy. I think that's fair. It just does seem to me like I'm like, what are we really doing here? Like, why are we have to go to this extreme? And I guess the promotion on social media just is where I'm like, for what? For who? For what purpose? But Andy, that's my one moment, my top of mind topic. But with that, Andy, let's wrap things up for this for Monday. I will call out. We have a new email address, so it's men of a certain x at gmail.com. And we also started a YouTube channel. So we have no videos on YouTube, but men of a certain x on YouTube. We'll start posting some of the podcasts on here as well, some other things. Got to figure some of that stuff out for the video, but that's all well and good. But we are getting there, Andy, as our audience continues to grow. So that's very fun announcement to make. But Andy, anything before we wrap up for this week?
No, Dave, I'm looking forward to another 3 day week here. We'll talk about our holiday schedule perhaps as we get into the week a little bit. And I'm excited to finish up the year with you and exciting news about YouTube. And I think it's going to be a fun 2024. So good, happy Monday to you, sir.
There we go. And with that, Andy, I'll catch you next time.